Okay, Yeshkoyach, thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here. Yeshkoyach to the Anhala. I'd like to give thanks to the one who invited me here, the Anhala Gashmi, Shlomi Greenwald. He asked me to come and share some of my experiences and perhaps enlighten and answer some questions and bring to light some issues that maybe have not been discussed by many. It's important to start off by saying that as a moil, we go around to different communities, different homes, different individuals, and every bris almost has a story for itself. Every parent, they have their fears, they have their questions, they have their doubts, and you have to be there to support them and to give them the proper approach and turn this into a great celebration. Just want to bring one story that I think would be a good way of starting. It was not long ago, I was called to a bris. Seemed like a regular bris, an 8-day-old. But it was quite unique and very emotional. It's because this 8-day-old, happy camper, I happened to have done his father as well. So he was there and he was satisfied and he was thankful. And I happened to have done his grandfather as well. And to make things even more excited, I did his great-grandfather. Not trying to give away my age, but I'm just trying to express the fact that this mitzvah is unique. I mean, they come from a place that tried to oppress the practice of the mitzvah, did not allow any moyalim to perform, and therefore, for generations, this family did not have a proper bris. When the opportunity came and they were able to do it, they did it. Now, are they fully observant? I don't know. And some of them are not yet probably fully observant, but this mitzvah is so unique that regardless of their level of observance, they do this b'mesiras nefesh. And being part of it, actually you feel and you can experience that. You see the element of mesiras nefesh. It's one of the greatest mitzvahs. It's actually the first mitzvah given to Avraham Avinu, the first of our fathers. It is a mitzvah that's done at every child, the first mitzvah that he experiences. It's the foundation. To become a yid, you have to go through this mitzvah, so it's essential. And it reaches into the neshama, and therefore, regardless of other type of expressions and behavior, this is the mitzvah they choose to do, although it is not the easiest. And the question, and the fact is that by being in such an environment, you could see and express and feel what it says in the Gemara, that other mitzvahs may not be done. There'll be a time when maybe they'll be lacking in performing of tefillin, but one mitzvah, which is the mitzvah of Mila, it will endure. They will do it. And the reason given is, again, it was given by Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. He says because this mitzvah is done b'simcha, and every mitzvah, this mitzvah that was accepted before by the Yidden b'simcha, so it'll endure even in times when it would be difficult. And that is because in addition to doing the mitzvah, which is difficult, there's a simcha, there's a party, there's a celebration. And another, Rabbi Shimon ben Eliezer says that this mitzvah was accepted b'mesiras nefesh. It's done b'mesiras nefesh, it was followed b'mesiras nefesh, so therefore it will endure, although it's not logical that this is the one that people choose when they don't do any other mitzvahs, but because they've accepted it b'mesiras nefesh, it endures. And when you're part of it, you can experience this. People doing this mitzvah, hard to explain, but you see the faith and you see the excitement and you see the fear and the joy all at once. It is also important to know that this mitzvah has been challenged through history. All through the times, whenever they wanted to clamp down on the performance of the mitzvahs, they would choose mitzvah Mila and they would say, oh, you're harming the child and you could not do that. And sometimes it was punishable for the male, for the parents. And still, b'mesiras nefesh, we did it when it was able to. And in fact, one of the minhagim that we have to put candles at a bris is because when it was prohibited, you wanted people to know where there's a bris and where to come quietly and celebrate. They would put candles on the window. That would be an indication that there's a bris going on. So today as well, I know some people know about it, some people don't, but I always try to emphasize whoever has a bris should bring candles. There is in Shulchan Aruch, it's brought down that you should have candles lit as part of the celebration. It's also brought down in Pirkei de Rabbi Lezer that we say, V'omer loch b'damai chayi, v'omer loch b'damai chi, twice. And it clearly says that once goes on Dam Mila, b'schus Dam Mila nigalu aviseinu mimitzrayim, and b'schus Dam Mila yigalu aviseinu migalu zeh achrein. So the power of this mitzvah Mila, the schus of the mitzvah Mila, gave us the ability to leave Mitzrayim, the first galus. And it is in the schus of this mitzvah that we will be exiting this galus as well. So the challenges have been there, and the schus of Mila will be the one that will bring us the ultimate redemption. Now the question is, yes, we've had challenges in the past. Do we have challenges today? Freedom of religion? And in fact, not long ago, there was in California a proposal to ban Mila. Wanted to have it on the ballot. And I was phone called by some reporters, what are we going to do about it? And I said, I don't think there's a problem. We're never going to stop. And this is not the first time that they tried banning Mila, so there's no real concern to such a challenge. In fact, we're not the only ones. The Muslims do, Mila, and I think the United Front, it would never pass, and that's what really happened. It was struck down, it never passed, never made mustard. But the challenge that we have now for Mila is even greater than those of the past. And there are challenges now that are unlike any challenge we had before. And that is because the challenge is not direct. If it would be a direct challenge, Mesiras Nefesh every Yid, regardless whether he's observant, non-observant, he knows that mitzvah Mila has to be done. But the challenge that we have now is an indirect challenge. And sometimes it's challenge because of lack of knowledge. And that's a greater challenge than just standing up and saying, we're going to do this because this is who we are. And I want to bring out here 3 points, 3 challenges that I feel are very important to bring to light. And I think that we can have a discussion here because I'm sure some of those facts may not be even known. And I'm going to start with the challenge that I know many, it lately seems to be even more than before, many individuals from completely observant decide that they're delaying the bris, they're not doing it at all, just because the doctor said that there's a condition that needs to be taken care of with surgery, perhaps some months later. So therefore, the doctor suggests not to do circumcision because that would hinder the surgery later. And that causes them not to do a bris because they were advised by the pediatrician, by the urologist, not to do the bris. Now, it sounds quite, important. Doctor says don't do it. There's a condition. How can we not follow the doctor's ruling? Well, the fact is that I deal with these cases, and my experience is that most of these cases, most of them, is completely possible to do a bris. And when a bris is done, most of them are corrected by the bris. Yet the doctor was the one who said, do not do the bris because we need to deal with it. And the parents, some of them are frightened to call the moil. And some of them call the moil and say, well, we're delaying the bris because the doctor said, and then we go into a conversation. And after the conversation and after back and forth, I give them another doctor's opinion and tell them to contact other professionals in the field, and they end up doing it. And this is happening over and over again. Again, it doesn't really limited to knowledge base. It happens to everyone, frum, fry, and this is the condition. First of all, the most common condition is when they look at the child and they say, oh, there's something wrong here, we have to do surgery. And then when you look at it yourself as a male, you see he's just chatzi noiled mole. So yeah, he looks different than a regular baby that's born. And if left untouched, it would look different, and it's not the same like everyone else. But it's chatzi neilad mol, means that he only has partial foreskin. And when you do the bris, all you have to do is take the part that's left, and whatever is not there, you cannot deal with. The end case, the end result is that it all looks the same, and you would never know that this kid had a condition which is called partial foreskin. So you tell the parents, hey, look at the child. Everything is fine. The only thing is that he looks different. It does look different at this point, but once the bris is done, so if you don't do the bris, he's not gemalit. And if you allow them to wait for circumcision in the hospital, months go by. It's a cosmetical thing that once you do the bris, it's not there. So for cosmetical reasons, they're fearful, and they're not going to do the bris because they're waiting because the doctor suggested. So it's important to note that just because the doctor said doesn't mean that this mitzvah should be altered and out of fear. There's another case which is a little more serious, and that's called Hyperspeedius. I believe there's been a share about this here. Hyperspeedius? No. Hyperspeedius is a condition where the nekev, where the child is mashtin, is not exactly in its proper place. It's a little bit lower than where it should usually be. What that causes is that it doesn't go straight, it's a little lower down. A bit different. It's a cosmetical condition, just a little off center, and the doctor says you can't do any circumcision because we have to do surgery, we have to straighten this out. Now, there's 2 points here. Number one, it's only cosmetical. It's just not perfectly in the center, it's a little off the center. And for a cosmetical reason, we're going to delay a bris. Why? And number two, even if you do want to do a cosmetical surgery for whatever reason, you want him to feel perfect, you can do that after circumcision as well, after the bris. You don't need to wait and do the surgery without having a bris done. Now, some doctors are very specific and are very harsh, and they come down and say, don't you do the circumcision or else the surgery cannot be done. Yeah, there are some doctors that say that. And my advice to parents is find another doctor. Find a more skilled doctor that can do the surgery, because if he says he cannot do it unless the circumcision is not done, then he's not as skilled as others. And Baruch Hashem, there are many doctors, and we have a network of doctors that we can provide for those who need to be done this surgery, even after a bris is done. And some of them are very accommodating. I would tell the parent, you know what, make an appointment, check this doctor out, and he'll tell you. And actually, if he tells you do not do the bris, okay, they have two opinions. But most of the time, I don't remember a time where he said you cannot do it. And again, you could do the bris, a normal bris. Maybe the male has to be a little more, experienced in this field of expertise and a little more training in this. I don't know if you should take a brand new male to do something like this, but the fact is a bris could be done, and there's no reason not to. In addition to the fact that even if you do want to do surgery, it may not be a good idea. Sometimes these surgeries need a follow-up. Sometimes it's not quite perfect afterwards. And for what reason? For it to be perfect? I mean, it's really cosmetical. So you're going to put the child through the trauma of a surgery and perhaps needing a follow-up surgery, and sometimes there's complications that come out for what? There are times where the hyperspeedius is severe, where the nekev is not just a little bit lower, it's all the way down, and it does need surgery. So that is a time where, yeah, you may need to wait for the bris and to do it, but that is so rare. It really almost doesn't happen. And if it does, you do have to wait, because it's not just a cosmetical, it's a condition that if it's not taken care of, this kid, will have an issue with reproduction and an issue with other complications that may occur. So at cases like that, you wait. But don't just take the most common case. Most of them can be done a proper bris, and there's no reason to delay. That is one very important challenge to bris that I feel has to be brought to light. In fact, there was years ago an asifa with great Rabbanim, Rabbi Marlow, signed a letter with many Rabbanim saying that it's usur to just take the doctor's advice and delay a bris without consulting a Meira Hira, a moil who's a mumch in the field. They also put down further because some of the surgeries that they do can actually cause a krushavchot, so safek krushavchot, or we don't need extra surgery, get a second opinion, don't just listen to the doctor. This is a letter that I have here signed by Rabbi Marlow and other Rabbanim bringing out the Ashara and the Isser to delay a bris just based on the doctor's advice. So I don't know why. I think this is happening more often. I don't know if it's just because of some conditions, but more and more this condition is coming up. And either the doctors are more happy to do surgery for whatever reason, and they're suggesting not to do the bris, but certainly seems to be more prevalent now than it used to be in the past. There's another condition that's very challenging. And this one perhaps has to do with lack of knowledge, again, as the other one. So the first one, letters of Rabbanim. This is the second challenge that I find today to be very, very severe. And some innocent families fall into this, and it should be brought to light. And the story is that not long ago in Crown Heights, there was a bris done, and I get a phone call saying, wow, beautiful bris. Somebody just came to do a bris, and there was no bleeding. No bleeding. I said, no bleeding? Okay. That raises an eyebrow, and as a male, the experience of no bleeding probably means that it was used a clamp. So I said, I suspect it was a clamp used, which is not a kosher method of a bris. Thank God there was a video of that bris, and I showed them clearly that the one who came to do a bris actually used a clamp. And the clamp, what it does is, it crushes the skin. Basically, the skin gets crushed to the point where it's dead skin. And then once it's being removed, you're removing dead skin, and there's no bleeding. Dead skin doesn't bleed. And they were very shocked to find out that the moil that they hired, which was considered to be a moil, an acceptable moil, actually used a clamp, which is a device that's usur. Now, for many reasons, it's usur. But the fact is that using a clamp is not a bris. You're not cutting. It's a bracha levatala. It's almost like putting on cream that would kill the skin and it will die off. Is that a bris? No. You have to use an ismal. It has to be a bracha. It has to be by Yer Shamayim. There is a device that has a hinge that's called a clamp. Now that comes on and clamps the skin. Now, if you didn't cut it, it would fall off by itself. Now, that bris does not have any bleeding. And there's an inyan that a bris should have dam mila. It's part of mitzvahs mila. In addition to the fact that crushing that skin is extremely painful. And if you don't trust me, you know what a vice grip is? It's one of those pliers that gets locked onto a screw. Try to do that here. Take a vice grip and clamp your skin, and you'll know what kind of pain the child goes through when you use a clamp. Now, a clamp is tsar, it's usur. A clamp is a method that has never been used. We use an ismil, we make a bracha, and it's pull of a hand. You're cutting dead skin, which is not the mitzvah milah. And in addition to the fact, there's also, it seals the skin. It's like a sealer. Do you ever see a plastic that you put into a machine and then suddenly it seals so no air goes in, no air goes. This seals the skin, so there's no bleeding. There's no bleeding, there's no kriya b'tzipaiden because there's no eira priya. There is no mitzitza because there's no bleeding. You're not mitzitz anything. It's sealed already. It's completely finished. So those who don't know and look at it, oh, it's a beautiful bris, there's no bleeding, and it looks like it's healed afterwards, there's no Band-Aid needed. But that is not a kosher bris, period. To the point that Rabbonim came out powerfully against it. The Rabbanut in Israel came out clearly against it, saying that anyone, all Sandiks and all Rabbonim in Eretz Yisrael, all the Poiskim, La'achreina, clearly against it. And even there's a letter from the Frierdiker Rebbe that he writes that a clamp is osur. And using a clamp on Shabbos is chilul Shabbos. You can't just cut surgery on Shabbos. You could do a bris on Shabbos, but if this is not a bris, you cannot do that on Shabbos. So using this on Shabbos would be chilul Shabbos. And if you do it in a shul, fnei asara, it's chilul Shabbos b'farhesya. And he goes even further. I mean, this is a study that shows that the clamp actually causes, the pain of the clamp is shocking pain to the heart. It can cause heart failure. It can cause to the brain, a shock to the brain. And the Frierdiker clearly writes, and others write it as well. He's not the only one, but I'm just bringing the Frierdiker Rebbe that he writes that a bris is intended to be maidich yomim, and a clamp is mikatzer yomov. And it should not be used together. Again, it looks perfect afterwards.
What do you mean a clamp being mikatzer, just on the physical?
This is what he writes. And there is a famous Molim that use clamps. I'm not arguing with that. And that's the challenge that I'm saying, that today we have a challenge that some people very innocent and would like to do the right thing. Just like a non-observant individual feels in some cases that, I did circumcision in a hospital, I did a bris. And they want to do a bris, and they feel that circumcision in the hospital is what they're doing, they too. But if they were taught and educated that a hospital bris, circumcision is not a bris, it's before 8 days, it's not done properly, they will do it right. And that's the shluchim. The first thing, when they know that somebody in their community is pregnant or possibly has a boy, the window of opportunity is short. You got to catch them right away and explain to them the importance of doing a bris and not doing it in the hospital. But this challenge is that even people who want to do and know the right thing of getting a mile and doing it at the 8th day, they're misled by the mile who does an improper bris, which is very, very severe. And in Israel, they came out and saying that anyone who does it should be disqualified and, so to speak, lose his license. But there's also a discussion whether this child needs dam bris after, whether dam bris is going to help, whether he needs it or whether he doesn't need it. But the fact is that this is misleading. A moil who uses it is really is bringing it down. His impression, he should be removed. He should be disqualified because he's not doing brisin. He's doing a disservice. It's lying to his clients. And further, this fear of the pain that's involved is pashut a disservice. If you see some of the videos of those who use clamps, people that come and they see a bris with a child is screeching for hours and he has no merkeiches to cry, it's a disservice for Mila. And then they see somebody who looks like he's a mile and seems to be doing. I get constantly, even last night, I got a phone call from a shliach. He has a community member who's thinking of using somebody who he knows uses a clamp, but he promised him that his clamp is kosher. I told him there's no such thing as a kosher clamp, just like there's no such thing as a kosher pig. A clamp is a clamp. It crushes the skin. Oh, his clamp is, and he's even musmach from Eretz Yisrael. I said, fine, if he has a license from Eretz Yisrael, let him follow the guidelines that he was committed to when he got the smicha, who is not to use a clamp. I have all the papers. Nobody in Israel, there's nobody who allows it, and they give you smicha dafke if you don't use it. Comes back into America, he says he's musmach from Eretz Yisrael and he uses a clamp. That's a crime.
Hospitals use clamps?
Hospitals use clamps. They don't do brisin.
But if there's these medical issues with using the clamp, then how do they use it?
Okay, so first of all, they do have much more complications than myelin. And this is statistically proven. that the complications that happen in hospitals are much greater than the complications that happen by moilim. And furthermore, I mean, there's even studies that SIDS or other conditions happen more prevalent by hospital circumcisions. There's studies that tell you that the children who go through this process are damaged. And there are anti-circumcision movement that tells you why do this trauma to a child. I'm with them. I also say why do this to a child, but that's not what we do as moilim. So the anti-circumcision movement is not really targeting bris because they're not talking about the pu'ula of a bris. They're talking about the trauma that a child goes through circumcision, and they ask the question, who says the trauma is worth the medical benefit? That's their question. They say today we have hygiene, and there used to be infections that come for those who are not circumcised, and even today there are those who are not circumcised, more prone to infection, but today we're more possible with hygiene, and who said the trauma of a circumcision is worth the benefit? That's their argument. And I'm not arguing with them because that is a legitimate argument. We don't do it like they do it. It's a different kind of bris. It's a different pu'ula. It's a different procedure. And in fact, I've had some medical professionals tell me they would never do to their own son what they do to others. That's the lashon they use. I will not do on my own what I do to others. And they actually use moilim for their own family and friends because they know. And even goyim want to use moilim, which is a different story. We don't, but they know the fact that a moil does it in a much more humane way. And if anyone watches a bris, it's a couple of seconds of discomfort, and the child is fine. He's sucking on the wine, and he's listening to the brachas. Versus try one of those hospital circumcisions. It's horrifying. It's a 15-minute procedure. It's torture. Bronstein is one of those type of clamps. Yes. Any clamp. Clamp is a device that has a hinge that locks on and crushes the skin. Furthermore, there are even muggins without a clamp, without a hinge. That's also usur, and that's if the slit is very thin. So it's not mamish a clamp. It doesn't crush the skin, but the fact that it's so thin. In Israel, they came out and they gave you the minimum. It should be at least 1 millimeter, and maximum in case of it needed in certain conditions, you could use 0.6 of a millimeter. But less than that would be usur, according to the Rabbanot of Israel, saying that mimics the procedure of a clamp. Although again, it's not a clamp, but still, being that thin, it would provide what a clamp does. It's like a male would come out with a certain cream and says, I can do the bris, I put the cream on and the arla falls off. Would that be good? It's the same idea.
Information, but like people, how could something come about that so blatantly usher that people are?
If you put on a cream, everyone would know something is wrong. But if you put on a clamp and you use a knife, the knife is really for nothing. It's like you're cutting on the dotted lines. You could rip it off. But no. The knife is really it's fictitious. It's making people think you're doing a proper bris.
That's what people.
It looks closer to what a real bris should be like, but those who don't know what to look for may think it's a real bris, but it's really not. And like I'm saying, the fact is that until it was brought to the attention, the bris in Crown Heights, everyone thought it was a proper bris. And that's a very severe situation, yeah.
Can you elaborate a little bit what terms and what ideas you should share with parents that are ready to do circumcision in the hospital and the benefits of doing it with them well?
Yes. I'm going to just take a short answering your question, then we'll go to the third one, which is very important as well. If you just present to them the different optics of what a bris looks like in the proper way and what happens in the hospital, many of them begin to realize and change their mind pretty quickly. And the difference is that here, the child is on a pillow, He's being held by a loving family individual, generally probably a grandfather. And he's surrounded by family and friends in a celebration type of environment. And it takes a couple of seconds, and literally he's comfortable right thereafter. And he gets a little bit of wine, and there's the brachas, and it's a beautiful event for him, for his family. Mashenkin, in a hospital environment, he's taken away from his parents. They don't usually see what's going on. It's the first surgery that interns do because nobody's there to say of how it went, and nobody's in the room to give any testimony. He's Velcroed to a board and taken to an unfriendly environment. He's put on, it's about a 15-minute procedure of torture. There's a clamp that goes on, which is extremely painful and traumatic for the child. His parents are not there. A bunch of interns, they sometimes cut once, cut twice to try to get it right. There's nobody there to assist him, to help him, or to be with him. And then after a half hour where he's exhausted and he's sleeping, he's brought back to his parents, quiet. And everyone seems happy. What would you really want? Just not to know what happened and torture your child, or to be right in front of him? I mean, there's most scrutinized practice is Mila. I mean, you're within arm's distance of the parents. If there's anything that goes slightly wrong, I mean, you're right there. If you don't do a flawless job, you're out of business. You can't hide anything. And today, with all the cell phones, I mean, it's even more scrutinized. So, I mean, just put the two together and tell them. And anyway, this is a mitzvah, and you're Jewish, and you want the bris because you're Jewish, because you want the blessings that come with it, the covenant, versus the kid needs surgery. What does he need surgery for? He's fine. He's healthy. So you want a bris. This is a bris, and that's not. So now is the third thing that you are going to allow me to speak about, and that is another challenge in today's environment more than ever before, and that is mitzitza b'peh. I know some of you asked even before we started, so I will try to elaborate as much as I can in the time that's given. And I do want to say that what mitzitza b'peh has caused is, in most cases, for parents to be extremely fearful. Even families that are completely observant and want to do the right thing and are okay with doing mitzitza b'peh if this is part of the bris, but they are very fearful that their kid's going to die because the mile is doing something that causes babies to die. That's what the media says, and they're very fearful. The Mesiras Nefesh, and there's another element to Mesiras Nefesh that the bris suddenly occurs, and that is mitzitza b'peh, such a traumatic, dangerous act, but we're going to do it anyway because this is what we are here for, and we pray that everything goes well. I mean, really, mothers are extremely fearful. They're extremely fearful about mitzitza b'peh, to the fact that even some of our own start questioning whether it should be done, or perhaps we could put that aside. And as much time as a moil has, he, as part of his job, is now to explain what is mitzitza b'peh, the safety points of mitzitza b'peh, put the fear aside until you get the parents to agree full-heartedly that it's okay for you to do it, because it's not as they thought it was, and it's not what they read it was. And the thing is like this. There's no question that for thousands of years, this is the way a bris was done. Mila, Priya, and Mitzitza. There's no dispute. It's not like a minig that started in later years or something. In fact, there's a medrash that says that Moshe Moel, Yeshua was Perea, and Aaron was Moitzitz. So this is the way Mila was done undisputedly for thousands of years. Now, as I mentioned, you could challenge bris, and then you'll have everyone stand up and say, no, this is who we are. We're never going to let this go. Or you can start saying, hey, you know what? Let's not challenge bris directly. Let's start challenge some components of bris. Now, there's no Muslims to help us on that. And some people also feel, oh, maybe, bris will be good if certain parts are not there. So it started with the Haskalah movement. They feel that, Yiddishkeit has to advance and develop, and what was done in the past is good for them, but now we're moving up a little bit, which is the same as the reform. We have to reform our actions to fit society. And today we know so much more about bacteria and virus. Who knew about that in the past? So therefore, how could you do something like Metzitza B'Peh? The Rambam probably never knew. If the Rambam knew about bacteria and virus, he would never allow Metzitza B'Peh. Is the argument that I get from some people who seem to be knowledgeable and observant. Just the Rambam writes about it, but we now know a lot more. So sounds like, again, if the Rambam knew what he knows, which is about bacteria and virus, they would never allow it. So this, started creeping into, must be a lot of cases where their kids are being affected, and then bacterial infection and viral infection. And therefore we have to alter it or ban it or do it some other way. In fact, in New York, 2002, they came out with a mandatory reporting that if a child after a bris has herpes, neonatal herpes, it has to be reported to the government. So initially, before that, there are those who claim that in the Jewish community, there are dozens of deaths because of Metzitza B'Peh, and it's just all shoved under the carpet. Nobody knows about it. So therefore, they came out with a mandatory reporting. You have to, if there's a child comes to a hospital or a doctor with any type of infection in the bris area, he must report it. And so then that will prove that there's so many deaths going on. Nothing happened. Nothing happened. Now, neonatal herpes is a natural thing. Neonatal herpes, girls get it, and uncircumcised boys get it. It happens to be that some circumcised boys also get it. So when a boy gets it, a Jewish boy is circumcised, it's the male for sure. When a girl gets it, it's natural. It could be the mother. In fact, about 90% of neonatal herpes comes from the mother at the time of birth. Then there's other caregivers, whether it's a nurse who changes the diaper and she has herpes, or family members. So that is attributed, it's all documented. That's attributed to any neonatal herpes that comes to a girl, to a non-circumcised. But if there's a Jewish boy that had herpes for whatever reason, it's the moil and it's Metzitza B'Peh. Now, do we know if the moil has herpes? We don't know. We don't even know who the moil is, but the moil was the cause of the herpes. And we have to catch him, and we have to make and ban it. So when they came out in 2011, they came out with a regulation. It happened to have been that a child passed away from herpes. Again, goyim pass away, and girls pass away. Since 2006 to 2011, there was many cases of those who passed away naturally, meaning because of herpes, and there was no question that the moil was involved because there was no moil there. Happened to have been 2011, a child passed away. So they found an opportunity. Now we're going to regulate Mila, and we're going to say that it's also to do Metzitza B'Peh unless there's a consent form signed by the parents that they know that this practice is dangerous and deadly. And they know that the government suggested not to be done, and still we're willing to do it. Basically, the parents are putting the child in harm's way, and you sign that paper, and you have to keep the paper for 1 year. And that is the only way a moil could do Metzitza B'Peh. So as a moil, and somebody who does brisin and concern, we know that if there's the slightest condition of jaundice, we delay a bris, and if there's any other concerns, nefesh achas, you don't do a bris, you could always do a bris later. So what is this? Is this real or it's not real? Is there a concern or there is no concern? So we started looking into this, Metzitza B'Peh question, and it became quite clear there's absolutely no evidence that a moil caused anything. And there were epidemiologists that took all the cases that they alleged to have been possibly through a moil, and one by one they started proving that there's no evidence whether the time the child got herpes cannot have come from the Mila. All the evidence that they tried to allege happened was one by one proven that it was not the mile. And then they actually came out to say that it's usher, and a lawsuit started, challenging the city and saying, listen, you can't just ban a religious practice. Prove us, show us the evidence. Show the evidence that there is a connection between the male and the child herpes. If there is an evidence and there is a connection, we have to address it. We're not here. And as part of the plaintiffs in the lawsuit, we clearly said we are willing to cooperate with the city. We are willing to, every case that you allege there's herpes and it's the male, we'll test the male, we'll test the child, and we'll see if there's a match, a DNA match of the herpes. We'll know if it's the male, we know we have to address it. He'll be banned, we'll know that something has to be done. But if it's not, you cannot just blame the male. In fact, there were DNA testing that was done to cases that they blamed the male, and DNA testing showed that it could not have been the male. In 2 cases that they took the DNA testing, it showed that it could not have been the male. And we were presenting to the city, show us. So thank God we're living in a place where there is freedom of religion. Freedom of religion doesn't mean that you could harm a child in the name of religion. It just means that if they want to regulate religion, they have to do it with strict scrutiny. They have to actually show real harm and that they're regulating the harm. There's something called rational basis. You're allowed to make rules that are rational. And rational basis applies to business and to other industries, that if the government feels that a restaurant needs a washing station, you can't open a restaurant unless you have a washing station. But they cannot regulate a religion until they have strict scrutiny. They show harm. And we were saying, hey, show us the harm. Came to a point where actually, just to make it a little on the short end of things here, that there was no evidence. There's never to date any case of DNA linking a male to Metzitza B'Peh. In fact, there's studies that show that Listerine kills viral and bacterial. And if an individual washes his mouth, if a male washes his mouth with Listerine, even if he is a carrier, it kills the virus, and you cannot transmit after that. And it's been proven that ma'alim do take the precaution. They wash their mouths. If anyone is not taking the precaution, it's the caregivers, it's the home, but the ma'alim take the proper precaution. In fact, it doesn't make sense, because if they claim the mouth as the source, they've never had an incident of bacterial virus that they're even blaming ma'il. A mouth is full of bacteria, and a mouth is also a source of virus transmission. So how could that be that they don't even allege that there's any bacterial connection between a ma'il and a bris? They have no cases that they can prove that any infection came because of the ma'il, but virus, yes. So bacteria decided not to be transmitted, but viral decided to be transmitted. Even that doesn't make sense. But the fact is that ma'alim take the precaution, and we wash or take the proper care, and it's never been proven until the city rescinded its regulation. So today there is no regulation, and the ma'alim are more careful. And as I mentioned before, ma'alim have a greater success rate with all the mitzitza. And in fact, in Israel, with the numbers of brisin that they do, there's far less herpes. And ma'alim do there a year 80,000 brisin. Even if you want to say half our Metzitza B'Peh directly, there is no cases of herpes that they have to say that there's a significant number to prove that ma'alim are the source. In Crown Heights, we all do Metzitza B'Peh. Never ever been a case where the child has been infected. So this is just a libelous attack on ma'alim. This is an attack on religion. This is a way to instill fear. This is a way to divert and try to alter the practice. The Rebbe Rashab has a letter clearly saying that the Mesoida should not be changed of a bris. It's never been any proof of harm. It's always been successful. Kol HaMishana, anyone who wants to, for whatever reason, even a halachic reason, to change the Mesoida, Yodeh Ala Tachtoina, he has to prove that there's a good reason and harm and reason to change, and that has not happened. And like the Rebbe Rashab writes, that if anyone yoyde mitzvah lo yoyde davara, there's never come a case of any moil causing any transmission, a moil that's careful and does the right thing. And from the Rebbe, it's very clear that a tube, a pipette, should absolutely not be used on an ash. Even if there are tadim in some cases for others, it should not be used for an ash. So with these three things, I would like to enter that you are the Maida Hayra for the future. This is a Chilul for Hayra. At least know these three things. Do not allow a bris to be delayed just because some doctor with no experience says don't do it. And if you know anyone, please have them, educate them. Realize that there are some people that are parading as if they're moilim, but they're actually not. They're causing more harm than good. They're not doing any brisson, period. That's those who use a clamp. And know that mitzitze bepeh is safe. As safe as the bris is safe. In fact, there are some people who say, don't do mitzitze bepeh. That's the only thing they know. And I say to yourself, you know how much complications a bris is? What are you talking about mitzitze bepeh, where there's never been any proof of harm? There are other things that could be, the only thing they're worried about is what the media says, that moilim kill babies because of mitzitze bepeh. That is debunked. Follow the science. It's fake news, those who claim that there's a problem. And I wish you guys a lot of atzlach. If there's any questions, I'm here. What?